Welcome to Mode Bespoke. I'm Atenas. For today's project, we're going to be working on a triangle shawl worked in Tunisian crochet. So let's get started. So here's a look at the shawl we're going to be creating today. Now this is a light fall or spring shawl. So I'm going to be using a very fine yarn to make this. The stitch we're going to be using is the moss stitch, and I filmed a tutorial for this stitch a while back, so I'm going to link it down in the description box below. And that'll be the step-by-step tutorial for how to work this specific stitch. So now, the measurement on this shawl is 60 inches, and this is across the top, by 31 inches from the top of the shawl to the tip. Now the border is optional, and if you do decide to add it, it's going to add about an inch to all three sides of your shawl. To make the shawl, I used 3 hanks of lace weight silk yarn. Now this yarn is available at Darn Good Yarn. I will put all the links down in the description box below. Because this is a fine weight yarn, you won't be able to see the stitching, so I'm going to work with a thicker yarn today. I'm going to work with a worsted or a medium weight yarn. You are going to need a Tunisian hook, so I'm using this corded hook. This is one of the KnitPal hooks. I'm going to use the 9mm because, like I said, I'm going to be working with a worsted yarn, so this is what it's going to look like once we finish. This way you can actually see the stitching. If you're going to be working with this fine yarn, then you're going to need a 4mm Tunisian hook. At the end of the video, I'll talk more about resizing this project for any of you that want to use a different size yarn or hook. The written pattern for this project is available on my website. I'm going to leave a link down below in the description box. Alright, so let's begin with a chain of 251 stitches. So we're going to begin with a slip knot. So just grab this knot right here. And we're going to begin our chain. To make a chain, you're going to wrap the yarn around your hook and you're going to pull this top loop through the bottom loop for 1. So let's repeat. Yarn over, pull through, that's 2. Yarn over, pull through, 3. And just continue until you have a chain that's 251 stitches. So I made a small chain, so this is only 13 stitches because I'm making a small sample so that I can show you the decreases that you're going to need to work in every row. But if you're going to be resizing this project, you can just work in any odd numbered multiple. Let's begin with our foundation row. We're going to skip the first stitch of the chain, and we're going to crochet into the second one. Now, I'm sorry if you see this marker. I got some Sharpie on my finger and I couldn't wash it all off. So we're going to work into that second stitch of the chain. So we're going to insert our hook into the stitch, then we're going to yarn over, and we're going to pull up a loop. You're just going to leave this loop on your hook, and that's it. So we've cast on 1. We're going to go into the next stitch, yarn over, and pull up a loop, and then in the next one, yarn over, pull up a loop, and just continue to cast on stitches until you've got 1 loop for every stitch of your chain. So since our chain was 251 stitches, I should have 251 loops on my hook by the time we are done with this chain. Once you have cast on all of your stitches, you're going to work a return pass. Now this is a regular return pass. So for this one, you're going to yarn over and pull through 1. So yarn over, pull through 1 loop, and that's this first loop here on the hook. So yarn over, pull through 1. And now for the rest of the row, we're going to yarn over and pull through 2. So yarn over, pull through 1, 2, and then yarn over, pull through 1, 2, yarn over, pull through 1, 2, and continue until you are left with just 1 loop on your hook. First row of moss stitch, we're going to skip the first vertical stitch. We're going to work into the second one. Now we're going to knit stitch. So if you look at the stitch, it's made up of 2 loops or 2 legs. So here we go, here's the front one and the back one. You're just going to insert your hook in between both of those and go all the way back. Next, we're going to yarn over and cast on 1 loop. For the next stitch, we are going to skip it. In this first row, we have to maintain the same stitch count as we did for the last row. So in order to maintain that stitch count, we're going to yarn over, so that creates a loop on our hook. Then you're going to skip that next vertical stitch and go into the one after that. You're going to knit stitch. So skip 1 and then knit stitch in the stitch after. And then we have to skip the next stitch. So just like we did in the previous stitch, we have to yarn over and cast on a loop. So you're going to skip one and then you're going to knit stitch in the one after that. So we're going to yarn over and we're going to skip the stitch and we're going to knit stitch in the stitch after that. There we go. Yarn over, skip a stitch, knit stitch in the next one. And then yarn over, skip a stitch, knit stitch in the next one. So you're just going to repeat this in the remaining stitches of the row. And when you get to the end, you're going to see 3 stitches. So we've got these 2 vertical stitches, so here's one, which you're going to skip. You're going to knit stitch in the second to last, and then you have to cast on 1 stitch in the last stitch of the row. So yarn over, skip, and we're going to knit stitch. And then you have to cast on 1 using this final stitch of the row. So you're just going to insert your hook, and I like to go right behind the 2 loops or the 2 legs on the side, and then just cast on 1. Once you've cast on, you're going to work a regular return pass. So yarn over, pull through 1, and then yarn over, pull through 2 in all of the remaining stitches of the row until you are left with just 1 loop on your hook. So I don't have a lot of stitches here, so I'm just going to work on these really quickly. All right, so from here on out, we are going to work a decrease in every single row. So we're doing this so that we can create that triangle shape. So we've already set the foundation for our moss stitch, which is the row we just finished. So from here on out, so from row 2 until the end of the project, every row gets a decrease. The decrease is going to be worked the same in every single row. So from here on out, we're going to repeat row 2. We're going to begin by skipping the first 2 vertical stitches of the row. We're going to go into the one that's right after that, so it looks like an inverted V, or if you want to look at it as kind of a more separated stitch, you're going to knit stitch into that one. So we're going to have a little bit of a space like this, but that's going to be our first decrease. Now for the rest of the row, we're going to work a regular moss stitch. We're going to do another decrease here at the end. So we just began with the knit stitch, and then we're going to yarn over and we're going to skip this next stitch. So yarn over, skip this one, and go into this next stitch right over here. So it kind of looks like an inverted V or an upside down V. You're going to knit stitch in that one. And we're going to yarn over and skip this stitch. So skip here, go into that next open inverted V stitch, and we're going to knit stitch. So we're going to yarn over, we're going to skip one, and we're going to knit stitch. And yarn over, skip one, and knit stitch. And then once you get to the end of the row, you should have something that looks like this. So you're going to have 1 vertical stitch, which is this one, and then the final stitch. You are going to skip that last stitch. So instead of doing a yarn over and then a knit stitch, you're just going to skip it. No yarn over, no nothing. You're going to cast on right into that final stitch of the row. So right in here. So we're just going to skip all of this, insert our hook, yarn over, and cast on 1. And now we did a decrease on both ends of our work. Then you just work a regular return pass. So I'll finish these stitches and then we'll do at least 2 more rows of decreases so you kind of get the hang of it. But the decreases are going to be exactly the same. So once you learn to identify the stitches, it becomes really easy to do. So let's begin this next row. So we begin by skipping these first 2 vertical stitches. We're going to go into this one right here. So it's kind of an open stitch. So we're going to skip, skip, knit stitch. And then we're going to moss stitch. So we're going to skip this next vertical stitch. So we have to yarn over, skip, and knit stitch in the stitch right after that. From here on out, you're going to notice that every time you knit stitch, it's going to be in that inverted V or that upside down V. That's how you know where you have to knit stitch. So you're always going to skip the vertical stitch that kind of looks like this. So it pops up towards the front. That's the one you do a yarn over, skip, and then you knit stitch in the stitch right after that one. Like I said, it takes maybe 2 or 3 rows, but once you get the hang of it, it becomes really easy to see your stitching. Once you get to the end of the row, your work is going to look like this. So you're going to have that vertical stitch right here that pops up towards the front, and then the final stitch. Remember to skip that the second to last stitch, which is the last vertical stitch. So skip the last vertical stitch and work a cast on in the final stitch of the row. So you're going to insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, and pull up a loop. And then you just work a return pass. So we'll begin another row together just to see this decrease one last time. Skip the first 2 stitches and we're going to knit stitch in the third. And then you begin your moss stitch. So we're going to yarn over and we're going to skip a stitch and knit stitch again. Yarn over, skip one, knit stitch in the next one. And then when you get to the end of the row, again, you're going to have 1 vertical stitch and then the final stitch of the row. So you're going to skip that last vertical stitch and cast on using the final stitch of the row. So we're just going to insert a hook into this stitch, yarn over, and cast on 1. And that's it. It's really incredibly simple. So it's just going to be a repeat of row 2. I crocheted, it was about 122 rows. You'll know when to stop when you get to the tip of the shawl. Now, to do the tip of the shawl, you're going to have to do something a little bit different. So your stitch changes just a bit. So keep working your decreases, and then I will show you how to do that last bit so you can finish the tip of the shawl. So once your work looks like this and you are left with 5 vertical stitches, so it's 3 very visible ones, 2 of the knit stitches, that's when you know you're going to have to switch the stitch up just a little bit to create that tip. So we're going to begin by skipping the first 2 vertical stitches and we're going to knit stitch in the next one. We're going to yarn over and skip a stitch. We're going to knit stitch in the next one. And then we're here at the end. So all we have left is just 1 vertical stitch and the final stitch of the row. So skip your final stitch, cast on into that last stitch of the row, and then work your return pass. Now here, you're going to have your 2 vertical stitches that you skip. You're going to have 1 knit stitch, and then you have the skip stitch and the final stitch of the row. Work this row just like you would at the other moss stitch row. So you're going to skip the 2 knit stitch in the center one, and then skip the second to last stitch, and then just cast on. You're going to be left with 3 loops on your hook. You're going to yarn over, pull through 1, yarn over, pull through 2, and then yarn over, pull through 2. You're going to be left with 3 stitches. We are going to skip this center stitch. You're just going to skip it and work into the final stitch of the row. So we're going to insert our hook into that final stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then we're going to single crochet. So you've got 2 loops on your hook. You're just going to yarn over and pull through both loops. So here's 1, 2. So yarn over, pull through both, and there you go. So that's how you would end the tip of your shawl. Once you get to this point, take a look at your shawl and decide if you want to add that border. So depending on what yarn you used, the border might not always make it look necessarily better. So let me show you. So I used this very fine yarn. So that's that lace yarn. And for this one, because the stitching seemed a little bit more open, I think it's because I used such a fine yarn, I wanted to add just a nice clean edge, so I added that border. Now, if you're going to be working with a lightweight yarn or a worsted yarn, so something that's a little bit bigger, you might not need a border. So this is a sample. Well, it's not really a sample. I created a whole other shawl. But as you can see, it's got a nice clean edge. Maybe it was because this yarn was 2 different colors, but the edge wasn't as clean looking. So I decided not to add a border to this worsted yarn. So let me find the tip here and I'll show you what this looks like. But once I worked the shawl with a larger yarn, I just skipped the border completely. I liked the drape. I liked how it looked. See, as you can see, the point is nice and clean, and both sides match really evenly, so I didn't add one. That's why I'm telling you, just take a look at your work, decide if you want to add a border. Now, if you do want to add a border, I'll show you how to add that in a minute, but let's go over how to do it in case you're a bit more advanced. We're going to begin at the tip, and then we're going to work 4 rows of extended single crochet. So we're going to work 1 row to the side, so you're just going to work 1 extended single crochet in every stitch along the side of the shawl. Once you get to the tip, you're going to chain one, turn your work around, and work an extended stitch in every stitch all the way back to the tip. Work 3 extended single crochets at the point, and then you're going to work on the other side. So you're going to go back to the extended single crochet along the left side of the shawl, and then come right back down. So on the points, you're always going to work 3 extended single crochets to give it a nice clean point. Each time you work a row, it counts as 1. So going all the way up, then down is 2. You're going to work a total of 4 rows to create the border. Now for the top, it's going to be something very, very similar. So let me lay this out so you can see it a little bit better. But we're going to be using the same stitch. So it's going to be an extended single crochet. You're just going to begin on either point. Just pick a point and just work 1 extended single crochet into every stitch along the edge of the shawl. I only had enough yarn to work 3 rows for that top border. So that's all I did. So the bottom border has 4, the top border only has 3 rows. So if you decide to make a border or not, you're going to end with a chain 1. So chain 1, leave a tail of yarn, and then cut it, if you're not going to do a border. Otherwise, chain 1, turn your work to the side. We're going to stitch along these side stitches right here. We're going to go into that very first one, and we're going to work an extended single crochet. So insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, and pull up a loop. Once you have 2 loops on your hook, you're going to yarn over and pull through the first loop. So yarn over and pull through 1. Again, you will be left with 2 loops on your hook. We're going to yarn over and pull through both loops. And that was an extended single crochet. Now, if you're asking why I didn't just double crochet is just a little bit taller, and it's also just a tiny bit wider. So if you would prefer to use a double crochet, go ahead and use that. I went with the extended single. So let's go over this stitch one more time for those of you that need to see it. We're going to insert our hook into the stitch. We're going to yarn over, pull up a loop. When we have 2 loops on our hook, we're going to yarn over, pull through the first one. And then we're going to yarn over and pull through the 2 loops on our hook. And there you go. Work an extended single crochet in every stitch along the side edge of the shawl, and then I will see you when you get to the corner. Alright, once you get to this corner stitch, you're going to finish your last extended single, and your edge should look like this. To begin the next row, we are just going to chain 1, and we're going to turn our work around. So chain, turn the work around, and we're going to begin on the very first stitch of the row. So it's going to be this one right here. We're just going to work an extended single right into that stitch. So insert our hook into the stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then yarn over, pull through 1, yarn over, pull through 2. Continue to work an extended single all the way until you get to the corner stitch. Once you reach the corner, or I should really call it the point, your work should look like this. So the centermost stitch is going to be right here. It is a little flat, so we're going to create a nice pointed tip for the bottommost, I guess, point of our shawl. So we're going to crochet 3 extended single crochets in that same stitch. So we've got 1. There we go, I have to fix that. All right, so we have 1. We're going to do 2. And then we're going to go 1 last extended single crochet in that same stitch. Now this created a nice pointed corner. So it's going to look a little more pointed when you add your next row. So it's gone all the way around, and then we just do the same thing we did just a second ago. You're going to work an extended single crochet until you get to the end, chain 1, turn your work around, and then come back to the tip. At the tip, you're going to work 3 extended single crochets and repeat again on the other side. You're going to do a total of 4 rows. Once you've finished your 4 rows, you're going to get to the tip one last time. In that point stitch, you're going to work 1 extended single crochet, and then we're going to chain 1. We're going to cut our tail yarn, so leave a nice long tail end right here. Cut that, weave that in, and then you are done. So this is what your shawl should look like, only, of course, much larger than this. Now let's work on that top border. Now this one's worked very similarly to what we just did. You're still going to work with that extended single crochet, but since you don't have the point to worry about, it's going to be a lot easier. Now to make this a little bit more visible, I'm going to use a different colored yarn. So I'm just going to grab this gray yarn right here, and then we're going to begin. So we're going to pick any of the corner stitches. So just go to the cornermost stitch on either side, whichever side you want. You're going to leave a long tail of yarn. We'll weave this in later. make a loop on your hook and pull that through the stitch. Next, you're going to chain 1. Now you can chain 1 using both threads of the yarn, or you can just use a single thread. Begin your extended single crochets in the stitch right next to where you started. There we go. So just work 1 extended single crochet in every stitch along the top part of the border, so along the top part of the shawl. And once you get to the end, your stitches may be a little difficult to see, but the last 3 stitches are going to look like this. So work your last 3 extended single crochets. So here's the last one. It's a little bit hidden right here. We're going to work 1 more stitch right here. And there's our first row. So like I said, I only had enough yarn to do 3 rows, but to do another row, you're going to chain 1 and turn your work around. Now in the very first stitch, because we want to keep the same angle, we need to add an extra stitch on either side of the shawl. So we're going to crochet 2 extended single crochets in that first stitch. So this is just going to add a little bit of width. So we're going to do 1 and then 2 in that same first stitch. And this will create a nice continuous border so that we have that same angle going throughout the entire shawl. So now in the rest of the row, you would just work 1 extended single crochet, and then you chain 1, turn your work around, and repeat. Remember to do 2 extended single crochet in that first stitch. So let's talk about resizing this project. Now, for the pattern, I wrote the stitch count for a thin yarn. So it is a lace yarn, it's a size 1 fingering yarn. So the 251 stitches are going to give you the measurements I gave you for this particular shawl. It is a very lightweight shawl, so it's a great fall or spring shawl. However, if you want to make something that is a little heavier or a little thicker, you can use a size 3, which is a DK or a lightweight yarn, or you can use a medium worsted yarn. This is a size 4. You can use the same stitch count if you want to, but know that it's going to create a ginormous shawl. So I wanted to experiment because I get a lot of questions about using different types of yarns. So I used this exact same stitch count. So I also chained 251 stitches, and I ended up with a shawl that was 90 inches along the top side. And it is 54 inches from the top of the shawl to the point. So it is a very, very large shawl. You can resize it so that it is a little bit smaller and it matches the other shawl. We'll talk about that here in just a second. Now, if you use a medium worsted yarn, so a size 4, medium worsted, Aran, or whatever it is that you call it, you're going to use a 9mm hook. I was able to fit all of these stitches in the KnitPal hook. That's the 16-inch cord. So you shouldn't have any problems fitting any of your stitches in there if you're going to be doing the shawl in this same size. If you want to use the worsted yarn, but you want a shawl that is smaller, so the shawl that's the same size as the lightweight one that's about 60 inches along the top side, then instead of chaining 251 stitches, just chain 171. That should give you a shawl that is about the same size as a lightweight shawl. Now, if you want to use any other yarn, go ahead and use a lightweight yarn if you feel like it, or a sport yarn. You are, however, going to have to change your hook size. So if you're going to go with a lightweight yarn, so a size 3 or a DK, I would use a size 7, so it's going to be a 7mm hook. If you're going to use a sport, maybe try a 6mm hook, but play around with it. This pattern is really, really easy to make. Just play around with different sizes of yarn and different sizes of hooks and find one that has the drape that you like for whatever yarn it is that you are using. But give it a try. Let me know what you think. Try it in different yarns. You can have a couple different shawls, and then you have some for winter, you have some for fall. But let me know what you think. Let me know what you tried. But yeah, that's all I've got for you guys today. You can stop by the blog to get your copy of the written pattern for this shawl, and that's modebespoke.com. I'll leave a link in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching, and if you want to see more of these videos, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. And if you'd like to see any more of my work, you can follow me on Instagram. I'm at mode.bespoke. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. I will see you all again in the next tutorial.